there's just like so much going on right now. Obviously, this is an incredibly busy time in the country. So many hearings, so many important decisions. There just seems to be a lot happening, Sarah.
It's true. I think what people feel is that more and more the Supreme Court is at the center of these political debates. And there is something a little bit new about that, because even 20 years ago, Congress and the president were the focus of our political debates. So why this mostly sudden change where we're constantly talking about the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court is really in all of these headlines, I would argue goes back to sort of the end of the Bush era, the beginning of President Obama's presidency, when they started getting really frustrated that Congress wasn't doing enough. And what started to happen was that every president would come in and basically reset the laws. So something that was a crime under Obama wouldn't be a crime under Trump, would be a different crime with different regulations under President Biden. And so the Supreme Court is constantly now in these headlines trying to ref who gets to decide. And so it becomes really then important. Who are these Supreme Court justices? How are they deciding these things? And I think that's why you see such a focus on the justices, the institution, and those headlines.
There's been a tremendous amount of focus on who is on the court that perhaps was not there 25 years ago. And then correspondingly, approval of the Supreme Court has plummeted. People don't think they have their best interests at heart. I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about why public opinion of the court has plummeted from your perspective. What does it look like from where you sit?
Largely speaking, all of our institutions, when they become the focus of our politics, lose trust.
The more we can ignore them, probably the less they're doing and the less annoying they are.
Right. There's a few reasons for that. One, transparency is not always a good word. You know, the introduction of C-SPAN into Congress probably wasn't actually great. It certainly wasn't great for what we think of Congress. Now, the flip side of that is maybe we should have been watching the whole time and we would have known what bad guys were in Congress. But generally speaking, there's a little bit of a Heisenberg principle here, right? If you're watching, it's not the same behavior. And so in Congress, for instance, there used to be real debates in the Senate. And then we introduced cameras. And now there aren't anymore.
Now it's just press conferences.
Right. Because you're not going to have a real debate with someone when everyone's watching. You can't really make compromise. And so all that log rolling and everything stopped. When you actually dig into the numbers of why support in the court has fallen, basically, if there's a Republican in office, Democrats don't approve of the Supreme Court. If there's a Democrat in the presidency, Republicans don't approve of the Supreme Court, even though that's irrelevant to who is on the Supreme Court. That's answer number one. Answer number two is that the court, by its nature, is supposed to be a countermajoritarian institution, meaning that if we could just leave everything up to the majority, you wouldn't need a Supreme Court. The majority would get its way. So much of the Constitution is to prevent the majority from getting its way. It's meant to have the separation of power so that one checks the other. But think about the Bill of Rights. You don't need a First Amendment to protect popular speech, to protect speech that the majority of Americans approve of. We have a First Amendment to protect really unpopular speech. The court is supposed to protect those minority interests, whatever they are, minority religion, minority speech, unpopular people. Well, guess what? The institution that constantly tells the majority no is also not going to be a very popular institution if the majority is paying attention. I would argue, historically, the cases that we look back on with the most disdain, Korematsu, Plessy, Dred Scott, obviously, are the cases where the court was actually giving in to the majority or thinking that they could handle the political moment and solve the problem better than any other branch, which isn't their job.
Okay, let's change gears because, you know, like new president returning to office, people are very curious about what the future of the court is going to be. A lot of people were like, listen, Sonia Sotomayor, you should just retire now and give Biden a chance to replace you. Thomas could also retire. Alito could also retire. In fact, it's more likely that they might retire now that Trump is coming back into office. They want to be replaced by Trump and not by somebody else. What do you see as potentially, I'm asking you to prognosticate here, of course, potentially changes in personnel, for lack of a better term, the personnel of the Supreme Court? Who do you think is likely to retire or potentially have to be replaced over the next 4 years?
I will give you an insight into what sort of conservative legal world thinks is the most likely Supreme Court come 2029.
Okay.
right? So the day that
Yep.
Trump leaves office in 2029, exactly the Supreme Court we have now. They do not think that Thomas and Alito will retire.
He's sticking.
And Sonia Sotomayor obviously will not retire by choice. And I actually believe that the institution of the Supreme Court is far better off when we don't have strategic retirements. Justices who try to overly plan these things out don't do very well. I don't know. Everyone in DC thinks they're playing five-dimensional chess. You're not. You're playing checkers at best. Make the next move. Don't try to think 5 moves ahead. It's not how this game works. There are plenty of lawyers on Trump's team that are qualified to be on the Supreme Court. And I think I use that term a little differently than others. I don't mean that means I agree with them. That doesn't mean I want them to be on the Supreme Court. I was actually one of the people who spoke in favor of Justice Elena Kagan's confirmation back during the Obama administration, even though I was a Republican operative, because I said she was qualified to serve on the Supreme Court. This caused a lot of problems at the times. But obviously she was qualified.
Mm-hmm.
That's not even really a question. But it is now in our partisan moment where people think qualified means agrees with me.
Right.
That's not my definition.
Right. Right. Or something is true if I agree with it.
Yes.
That's what we're operating with here.
Or I like it. It's true if I like it.
And it's true. I don't like it. You're a liar.
Yeah. And a bad person.
You're a traitor. You're committing treason. You're the deep state. You're going straight to hell. Do not pass go. I disagree with you.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's where we are.